It's the American Godzilla. Let's talk about Cloverfield.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. As you know, today's episode is Have You Seen? And for the people that might be here for the first time, Daniel, do you want to let them know what we're here to discuss?
So, Have You Seen is our series in which we talk about a movie that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. This week, we are talking about Cloverfield, which is the 2008 found footage kaiju movie, which tells the story of a couple of Manhattan friends who are at the start of the movie hosting a going away party for one of their group. And in the course of that evening, a giant monster attacks Manhattan, and they have to first survive and then rescue one of their groups who has been stranded in her apartment, and then they have to make it off Manhattan. So I've seen this movie a bunch of times, and I actually have a kind of a history with this movie, which we can go into. But Herbert, you just saw this one for the first time, right? So what are your takeaways from Cloverfield?
So, firstly, I think I kind of went through a little bit of a roller coaster ride with this movie because when it first started off, I didn't know anything about the movie. I'd heard of Cloverfield, but I'd never watched it and didn't know too much about the movie. So when it first started and we were doing this found footage stuff, I thought we were just kind of doing, one of those like flashbacks or just like showing an event that happened through a camcorder at the start of a movie before we get into the actual story and before we actually get into telling the movie from the usual perspective. So I was trying to kind of understand what was going on, and of course we started spending a lot of time with the person behind the camcorder. And at first, I know they were doing the whole getting to know the characters and understanding who this group were, but I was kind of finding myself a little bit lost in the movie and not really understanding the point of it. Again, that's because I didn't know what the movie was, and part of it was expecting a no, like I wouldn't say disaster movie, but I knew that there was, things that go down, and I was like kind of just waiting to get to that point. But once we reached it, once the first attack happened, and everyone's a little bit confused as to what's happened, and I start to realize, okay, this is the type of movie that we're getting. I found myself enjoying it quite a lot, and I'm enjoying the perspective and the way that it was being shot quite a lot because it's not something that you get a lot. Normally, you have the action hero, and some you do get it in some movies, things like A Quiet Place and stuff like that. But it's very rare that you get live as the attack's happening, the perspective of the people that are being attacked on the street level, and just the way that it was shot, and just the way that you were getting the difference. Like the one thing I really enjoyed was after the initial attacks happen, there's this like big cloud of like dust or whatever, and everyone's being evacuated. They just kind of turn into a random street where they're able to kind of gather themselves and try to come to terms with what's going on. And normally in these type of movies, it's just like action. As soon as the kaiju shows up, it's just like loads of action, etc. But it was just that pause. It made it a little bit more believable, a little bit more real. That pause that they're on this like random street where nothing's really happening. Of course, like in the background in the city, there's this whole army trying to take down this kaiju, but from their perspective, it's just kind of like quieting down. They're kind of gathering themselves. You're seeing everyone being confused, not just like the main group that we're with, but a lot of the other survivors are a little bit confused as to like what's going on in the comments and like not really knowing what's going on, not really believing their eyes and stuff like that. So I thought all of that was really well done. And then I think unfortunately, even though the movie's only an hour and 25 minutes or so, I think it kind of wore out on me, or it kind of over done it a little bit for me towards the latter part of the movie, where I was like, okay, I think I've seen enough. I think I understand a little bit. A little bit. I don't think I was getting anything completely new anymore from the movie that I hadn't already been served earlier in the movie. I think after a certain point, I was kind of done with it, and I was like, okay, like I've seen the appeal. I do like it, but we're running out its course, and I don't think I cared enough about them going to save the girl in her apartment because I kind of thought it was stupid, and I thought she probably should have been dead by the time we got there. So I wasn't heavily invested in that, and I don't think there was enough scary moments or enough horror or kaiju moments that happened throughout the movie to really keep it compelling. And often when it did come, and of course it needed to be there, it just didn't feel like it made sense. Like when they're going through the subway tunnel and you have those monsters just like creeping up behind them on the wall. I think that was just done for the effect of we've all called me through a camcorder and we're going to switch to night vision and we're going to see the monsters. It didn't quite make sense why and how they ended up in the tunnels, especially that people weren't being evacuated underground, so that they didn't really have anything to chase down there apart from that main group that was down there for ages. And then the other one was when I think it was like Huda or Hud, or I can't remember his name. But when he
Hut,
died,
yeah.
Hud, yeah, it's like when he dies, it's like 1 minute there's no kaiju, goes to pick up the camcorder, looks up, and there's this massive kaiju over him, and he dies. And I was like, okay, like didn't hear it coming, didn't see it coming. That big thing. It's like okay, it did make sense. But I think overall, well shot, well directed. I think the characters do a solid enough job throughout the movie, even though I don't think I ended up caring enough about their end quest. But I think it's a enjoyable movie, and I think it's the right length because I don't think you can make it shorter than what it was. But I think it was the right length to not make it drawn out.
Yeah, that's interesting. You brought up a couple of points that I think we can go into because in some places I have a very different reaction to the movie compared to you. But I just wanted to quickly kind of go over my history with the movie because it is not a normal movie for me. And that is part of why I like this movie so much. And that is why I suggested it for this. And that is that in 2008, I was studying in Australia at university during my summer holidays, which was like December, January, which were the long holidays. I would go to Prague, which is where my parents were working at the time. And while they were working, I was in their apartment in a city where I didn't know anybody, where I didn't speak the language. And, I found a way to kill the time. And during the weekends, we did stuff. But I had a lot of time on my own during that time. And then I found a cinema in Prague that showed English language movies for quite cheap. And so I went there like 2 or 3 times a week. Every time something remotely interesting was showing, I was going to the cinema because it was in English and it was very close to where I was staying, and it was a way to kill an afternoon, right? And one of the movies I saw, I don't remember any of the other movies I saw during that time, but the movie I remember is Cloverfield. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know any of the names. I didn't know, like, it was just a movie, like some monster movie that was showing, right? And I walked into Cloverfield and I was blown away by it. And I'm like 19 at this point, right? And it stayed with me for weeks. I could not get the monster out of my head for weeks. And even after that, it stayed with me for a while. And it's probably the movie that had the biggest impact on me in terms of just how I felt. Like a lot of movies are kind of disposable. And even if a movie is, like it blows you away, whatever, it does not stay with you in that way, right? You maybe remember it fondly. You want to rewatch it every couple of years. You want to talk about how amazing it is. But Cloverfield stayed in my head for 2 or 3 weeks. And basically, I thought about nothing else. Just because those images, like part of it was also there. I saw it at 19. And like a found footage kaiju movie, that combination was something that was not common at the time, right? Like it was unlike anything I had seen before at that time. And also, it was kind of the only thing that was occupying my mind for that week. And so, put all that together, and on top of that, it's just a well-made movie. Put all those together, and it's the movie that stayed with me for the most out of any movie I've seen. That doesn't mean it's the best movie. Doesn't mean you cannot improve it or whatever. But just in terms of the impact it had on me, it's unrivaled and by a wide margin. There's no other movie that stayed with me in quite the same way. And I recognize that this is not a rational reason, or this is not a reason why you should like it or why anybody else should like it. But that is the history and the baggage I bring to this movie, because that is how I experienced it the first time I saw it. And every time I watch it, which is like 4 or 5 times since then, it kind of brings me back to that bleak winter in Prague in 2008, where I would just walked into a cinema trying to kill some time, and I walked away changed. I have tried to replicate this experience since then, and I've not been able to, even though I've seen better movies since then. And so for that reason, this movie will always have a special place in my heart. But I recognize that it has some flaws and that other people don't have the same background. But that is why it stuck with me for all these years.
And having watched it recently, does it still bring back those feelings, or do you still hold it to such high esteem personally?
At this point, it doesn't, like it's faded a little bit. And at this point, it's just a good movie, but it does bring me back to that time a little bit, and reminds me a little bit about how I lost sleep because of this movie, because I couldn't stop thinking about it. It's not because I was scared, right? It was not because I thought it was so real, but it just stayed with me, and I lost sleep because of it. Like the big kaiju Clover and the little ticks, right? That stalk people in the subways and all of that. It just stayed with me for a while, and that obviously it's been what 17 years since then. So it's like obviously the impressions kind of changed over time, right? But it does bring me back to that winter in Prague in 2008 when I watch it again. So having gone over that, you said something about, you didn't say boring, but that's kind of what it came down to, right? Like that basically this is longer than it needs to, and it kind of repeats itself. That's kind of the impression I got from it. Is that kind of your experience?
I think, what I meant by that is it wasn't doing anything completely new anymore. So, when we first start off with the movie and we're on this camcorder and everything's being shot through this camcorder and you're having those experiences where he's trying to record people, maybe like he turns it off for a little bit, like puts it down, he's like capturing conversations and stuff like that. All of that is pretty novel at the start of the movie, especially for someone that doesn't watch too many found footage movies, especially one where there's a kaiju in it. And of course, when you're seeing initial reactions on the streets and stuff like that, I think it's all great. But I think it's at a point after they've gone to the army base and then they choose to leave. And I think it's still like a little bit later than that. But I think it's like at the point where they're trying to get to the building to go and save his girlfriend, where I don't feel like we're doing anything completely new anymore that I haven't seen. And you're kind of I think I was just kind of waiting for the movie to wind down, because I think the most enjoyment I had from this was one, the way it was shot, two, the initial reactions to sort of what happened. I think the army base comes after. Actually, no, the army base comes after they were underground, because that girl dies. I can't remember her name, but that girl dies.
Yeah, Malena gets bitten, and then in the army base they discover the infection, and things go south.
Yeah.
But that's actually an example of, so one of the things I have with movies is that I want to be impressed. I want to be like a movie doesn't have to reinvent the wheel every time, but it should show some creativity. It should put some thought and care into its action sequences and into its set pieces and into just what it's showing. So whenever I absolutely hate an action movie that we talk about, it's probably because the action is very rote and it doesn't do anything creative, and it's just shooting and running and shouting for 90 minutes, and that's kind of it. To me, that's what sets good action movies apart from the bad ones. And so whenever I look at a movie, I look for creativity and like cool moments that like they should fit into the story and they should be supported by the characters and so on. But I want to gasp a few times when I watch a movie, right? And this movie does a lot of them. So, for example, the first one is when they're in the streets, right? Like when this oil tanker has capsized and there's power outages, and they go into the streets and they realize that something is going on, but they don't know what. And then the head of the Statue of Liberty crashes into the street and there's giant claw marks all over it. What did you think when you saw that?
I thought that was pretty cool. I thought, again, that was one of the moments where I was like, damn, like imagine being in that situation, imagine reacting to that, where this thing that you've only ever seen in the distance, that's something that you can never ever see like toppling or coming down or whatever, and you just have the head of it in the street. It's just like a big WTF moment in the movie. I thought that was great, and I feel like everything around that was where I was where I was getting quite a lot of enjoyment out of the movie. I think if I can take it to another high point as well that I had was, as they're just casually, not casually, but as they're trying to navigate through the streets, and then all of a sudden they find themselves caught in between the crossfire between the kaiju and the army that are trying to take it down. I was like, wow, like I was really impressed with that. That's like another like WTF, like what would you do in that situation? Like one wrong move and you can get hit with a bullet. Like, see, you might die by the kaiju, you might die by the bullets. It's like a really hairy situation that you're in there. So I think for sure the movie definitely has a lot of cool moments. It has a lot of moments that really stand out. And yeah, definitely the head of the Statue of Liberty was one where I was like, okay, like this is impressive. This is like really throwing the characters in a very unfamiliar and a very sort of confused situation, and it's like, how do you deal with it from there?
And I've got a list of cool moments. So I'm just getting started. But yeah, that scene by itself. So first of all, like we all know what's going on, right? Like we spend something like 20 minutes on this boring party with these boring people, and even rewatching it today, I did not spot anything all that interesting, right? It sets up like the basic dynamic between the friends, especially Rob and Beth, right? So between like that's kind of the important one that kind of holds the plot together. But it's kind of mundane. It's like kind of like boring New Yorkers, right? And then this opening salvo with the head of the Statue of Liberty, like that's kind of like telling us, okay, we know what kind of movie this is. As we see the party unfold, we're kind of waiting for the movie to start, right? And then it starts, and it starts with this image, which by itself is a reference. It's a reference to a movie poster from Escape from New York, which was about like a dystopian New York that had been turned into a penal colony, and the poster had like the head of the Statue of Liberty lying in some rubble. And that image is not in the movie, if I remember correctly. It's just a cool image that kind of sold to the movie because it's on the poster. And here they found a way to put it in. So this is also, in addition to being a cool way to open the action, it's also the right way to do a reference, because if you're a movie buff, you know what this image means or where it comes from, but it doesn't stop the story. Like if it wasn't a reference, it would still work. So that's just a little side note where like that's how you do that, right? Like a lot of the times references kind of stop the movie, and kind of if you're not in the know, you get nothing out of them, and like this does it correctly. Another one is, like you mentioned, the subway sequence as something that didn't work for you. I think it kind of works. Like at that point, they're going towards the danger, and so the area they're heading into has been evacuated. That is why nobody's there, and that's why there is nobody trying to clear them out. And that is why they can walk through these empty subway tunnels. And then you have the image with the rats running away from something, and then these tick monsters appear. And I think if there's a flaw with that sequence, it's that maybe they shouldn't win that fight by themselves, because they've never been in a fight before, right? They're just, Manhattanites. But I thought that sequence worked, where we saw earlier in the news footage that these little ticks were falling off the big monster, and now we see them actually going after the characters. So we've already introduced them, and then we see them in action. So when they attack, we kind of know who they are and what they are and where they come from. So I thought that sequence worked.
I think for me, I wouldn't say it didn't work, because I think that whole switching to night vision and then seeing the monsters like creeping up behind them, I think that's like a cool shot, and I think that serves its purpose. But I don't know. It just felt a little bit. I think we were talking about it like earlier. It's like it felt a little bit road. It felt like how I had expected to go, where you have the animals going away from some danger, and then you have the creature lurking behind when it could have got them at any point previous to that. And I think, again, like you mentioned as well, is that what probably doesn't help it as well is the fact that they win the fight when they really shouldn't, and there's no sense as to why they win the fight, because they probably all should have been dead in that situation. So I don't think it's like something that's bad or completely breaks the movie, or is like a turn off, but it's just a bit like it's not impressive. I would say it's not something that was like, okay, this is like super innovative, apart from like the whole switching to the night vision and then seeing the monster. But again, it's that in itself isn't the most impressive thing in the world. But yeah, I think I was just kind of, like I know what they're going. As soon as you see the rats running away from it, I was like, I kind of know what's happening. Especially I haven't seen the ticks dropping off beforehand, so I'm like, okay. Like, of course, a bit like, because again, this was like a long stretch of no action. You could just kind of hear the shooting and the fighting going on above ground, and you have the characters just kind of like wrestling with the situation that they're in. So it just kind of felt a little bit obligatory to have some type of action in there to kind of raise the stakes a little bit, which is why I think I was just a bit like, sure, like it's more of like a shoulder shrug as opposed to it being bad.
It's certainly not the big wow moment, but I thought it worked. I thought it was competent, but you're right. As soon as you see the rats running away, you kind of know what's going to happen, yeah. But it's also kind of, first of all, it's kind of a connective scene to lead us into the next scene, and it also sets up the death of Melena, right, where she gets bitten by one of the ticks, and then in the next scene they reach this army base or army camp, right, where we get a whole bunch of information, right? We get a lot of information all at once because of like little details, little lines characters are saying, right? We're kind of seeing that the fight is not going well. We see that the army is preparing to fall back. And then when they see that Malena is sick, they know what's going on, which imply like they know that she's been infected, and they lead her away into an examination room, like and she's kind of backlit against this cloth top, right? And then we see her explode, like her stomach kind of expands, and then there's just a fountain of blood that covers the entire thing. And it takes like a second, but I think it's a very effective shot. And it's not just that it's a well-made like character death. It also tells us a whole bunch of things, because the army at this point has figured this out, which means this is happening over and over again by the hundreds and thousands throughout Manhattan, right? And so this is something they know is going on, that they have a plan for, which means it's pretty common, and they also have no countermeasure. That all happens in like 5 seconds or 10 seconds. And I think that is kind of why I like that sequence so much, because you get a lot of information and there's a little bit of exposition dumping going on, but like that specific part, it tells a lot in very little time with very few words.
I guess when you put it like that, it kind of ties in to the previous scene where they get attacked a little bit better as well, because I think to add to it as well is that it's not instant, because I think she gets bit and then they hide out in the room for a little bit, but it's like something that happens over time as well, so you kind of get that bit of information from there as well. And yeah, it just like you said, it adds to the tension of feeling a little bit like hopeless and feeling like things are not going well, and the fact that this group are still trying to head into the danger, knowing all of that, just like adds to the stakes a little bit more.
Especially like on the exposition front, it's very easy to do this wrong, where you just give too much information all at once. And I think for like some of the time they kind of get it wrong, but most of the time they kind of give adequate amounts of information. Like when they are in the electronics shop, for example, and they're trying to get like a phone battery. There's people around looting TVs and whatever, and that's just news on like show. Like they get a bunch of information from the TV, right? Because obviously it's all over the news, right? So it's very transparent why they're doing like why that scene is there, right? Because we have to communicate this somehow.
I actually really did like that scene as well, because it just kind of showed, again, without being too explicit, just the chaos that would be ensuing on the street. It makes it again very real. It makes it a little bit more. It kind of brings you into the world a little bit more, because like amongst this panic, there are still those opportunists that are still like kind of like out for themselves, despite all the danger that's going on, despite like whatever. There's still like that selfish tendency within some people to seize the opportunity to kind of grab stuff that probably won't even mean much to them. Like once everything's all said and done with the monster, it's like, how much does a new like TV or like radio or like whatever they had, back then really mean? But it just like really added to the immersion of sort of the movie and of everything that was going on.
This kind of speaks to the realism of this, right? Because this happens in every disaster, right? Natural disasters, wars, whatever, right? Like there will be looting, there will be people taking opportunity, like seizing an opportunity that might not even be, or that, like you say, like what use is a TV like in a kaiju attack, right? Like, do you really think you will keep it and will survive this? And do you really think this is like the best use of your time right now? But people will do it, right? And so there's like little things here that kind of make this a little bit more believable, because people act like people. And that is another topic I want to get into in a moment. But the other thing I wanted to like as we're talking about exposition, occasionally HUD will tilt the camera exactly where it needs to be in order for a jet to fly over, or a missile to hit, or like the monster to be just in frame, right? So it's a little bit convenient a lot of the time, right? But I think overall the movie does a good job kind of explaining what's going on without kind of breaking the immersion, right? And like the scene in the army base where Malena dies, that's we get a lot of, like, if you pay attention to the details, there's a lot going on, and you can get that's probably the scene gives you the most information in the smallest amount of time in order to, on the basis of understanding what's happening and how things are going. You don't need a big briefing scene. You don't need a huge exposition dump. Just based on the way people are acting and how they deal with this, that tells you that they are losing, that they are learning things, and every time they learn something, they just realize how much out of their depth they are. They are not in a triumphant mood. They're not putting together the big plan, right? Throughout the entire movie, the army is kind of on the defensive, right? And we kind of get this in that scene, right? Just based on little things people say and how they act and how they treat the main characters, in how much of a hurry they are and stuff like that, right? So and then it very quickly leads into this scene where Milena kind of just explodes. And the implication being an alien parasite has just hatched from her body. And we don't actually see it, we just infer it. And we know that they're studying this stuff because just seconds before that, they are carrying a dead tick, in a containment box, just somewhere to be studied, right? Stuff it's just, it's this entire sequence, I think it's just really well done, just in terms of bringing across information and establishing a mood. And then you mentioned also Beth's apartment, which I actually thought was a decent sequence. I don't care about Beth, right? I don't care about their romance. I'm not there for that. But this tilted over skyscraper where they have to climb into the skyscraper that has kind of collapsed into another one. And so everything is at an angle and everything is close to collapsing, and there's a kaiju rampaging just a couple blocks down, and they have to get to her and then escape. And it's just... the entire sequence is just a different... it's very clearly just the actors leaning to the side a bit, and the camera tilts at a 45-degree angle to make it look as if the building is tilted over, right? It's very transparent what's going on. But if you can suspend your disbelief for a second, it's not a sequence you see very often. When was the last time you saw a building on its side? And that be the setting for an action sequence?
Not for a while, and I think again... it's funny because HUD says it almost as a bit of a joke, the whole plan to climb into one building and cross over, because surely there must be somewhere to cross where the buildings collapse. And it sounds absurd, but they make, like you said, they make it work. They make it sort of quite believable. And I agree that's one of the good sequences as well, because again I think one thing that the movie does really well throughout is just adding that level of tension to it, because as they're crossing, you said that you've got that rampaging kaiju behind destroying other buildings, and at any point, from there, it could be your building that you're in, and all this effort that you've gone through could be for nothing because everyone just might end up dying. So I think, I think quality sequence, quality scene with the building tension, throughout it. And again, like you said, something that's unique and something that you don't always see done well. And the only thing that's kind of coming to me at the moment is Inception, where I mean many movies do it, where you kind of you've got the rotating walls, and you're kind of mostly in action movies where you're trying to fight, and things toppling over and moving from side to side and stuff like that. And actually there are a number of examples of it. But just kind of seeing regular people just trying to navigate and trying to get across the different buildings. I thought it was great. I thought it was cool.
And none of these scenes is going to set the world of cinema on fire, right? None of this is going... I don't think they definitely didn't win any Oscars. They did win a couple of awards here and there. But it's just, as you watch it, the movie offers you something. The movie says, hey, we had some ideas. And if you go on this ride with us, you will experience 4 or 5 of them. Right? It's not simply people running away from the monster that's off screen, right? There are a whole bunch of sequences in here where they thought about, okay, what cool images can we create based on, a giant monster rampaging through Manhattan. You know what I mean? A lot of the time when I'm critical of action movies specifically, part of me in the back of my head asks, should I just turn my brain off, have some fun? Am I not ruining the fun for myself? Am I not, are my standards not too high? And then something like this comes along, and this is not the best movie. This is not the best action movie. This is not the best kaiju movie, but it just does it, right? In 80 minutes, 85 minutes, it does it 4 or 5 times. And it's why can something like Godzilla X Kong not do it? Why is that less impressive than this? 17 years later, 16 years later, You know what I mean? So that's kind of my bar for what a movie like this should do. Like, I don't care about these, like I said before, I don't care about the characters, I don't care about the romance, I don't care if they survive or not, although I do like that generally they don't. But we'll get to the ending in a minute. But what I'm here for is just the experience of surviving Manhattan during a kaiju attack. And the movie is supposed to make this believable, and it's supposed to make it entertaining, and it's supposed to make it entertaining and thrilling. And I think it does that through a different bunch of different ways. I think the actors like sell the idea. Maybe they're a little bit too collected. Like, if they probably have never been in a violent situation, right? Like, they should be panicking a lot more, and they kind of have it together a little bit more than they should, maybe. But it's like they get the job done, and then they lead us through these set pieces, through these theme park rides, where there's not really any real danger, right? Like, not really. Like, it's kind of fake danger in a way. But it's exciting because it's creative and because it's showing you something that you don't see in every movie. So on that level, I think this movie succeeds quite a bit.
On what you say about the characters, while I generally agree that the characters are kind of whatever, I will say I really did like Rob in this movie and his performance, and I think he really sold me on the idea of someone that was determined to save someone that he cared about a lot. And it was also just the way that he behaved, and the frustrations, like especially in the scene in the underground, in the tunnel, where he's just kind of like pacing up and down. He's like gone to sit by himself. He just like comes across as like highly stressed about this person that he cares about is stuck somewhere, and there's certain things that are just like blocking him from being able to do it. And even just like the way that he didn't ask people to come along with him. He didn't like ask anyone to be along for the ride. It was just a case of he's processing, makes a decision, is going to do it, and it's generally the other characters trying to stop him, but he's like, no, I need to go and do this. And then they're like, fine, like, I'll come along. And I think probably the part where I think they could have maybe done a little bit better, or maybe included maybe 1-2 characters, is where they're heading towards danger. And I think that's where you can have some level of conflict. And I know it didn't need to be, super complex, but some level of conflict of, these characters are like, no, you're absolutely insane. There's no way we're heading back towards that monster. We need to get the hell out of it. We need to be evacuated. And then you have like a group of people split, as opposed to like everyone kind of being like, oh, like if you go, I'm going to go. And I think it was like HUD that maybe did argue against it at some point or whatever like that. I can't remember. But I think just kind of like back to Rob, I thought personally he did a good job in just selling me on someone that really wanted to save someone that he really cared about, and was very focused and very narrow-minded, and would literally put himself in through all the dangers just to go and save the person.
What really holds this movie together is this contrast of the relationship between Rob and Beth, right? About how we are seeing, like, they are taping over an old amusement park visit, right? And so the tape keeps glitching back to when they just started dating, presumably, or at least when they were like happy, were not broken up. And that's kind of the baseline of what they could be, right? And then in the initial 20 minutes, we have Rob, he's going off to Japan, right? And he's not leaving on good terms with Beth, right? And she leaves the party early and all of that, right? That's why she's in her apartment in the first place. And so this whole idea that Rob is abandoning her in some way, that's kind of the starting point of all of this. And then half the movie focuses on Rob endangering everybody, including himself, to get to Beth, to save her, to not abandon her, right? So I don't think there's much going on here. It's not very deep, but like this 3-level parallel is kind of what kind of holds the entire thing together. And I think that works. I still don't care about either of them as people, but this contrast and this paradox and like his mini arc, right? Like he almost abandoned her, and now that they're in a crisis, he couldn't live with actually abandoning her and all of that, right? And so that's why they go through all of this, and then in the end they die anyway, like under a bridge in a bomb blast. So there's a little bit of poetry here, right? It's not terribly deep. I don't think it says anything special, but that kind of 4-step almost irony is I think what holds the thing together. So it's not just 80 minutes of people running away from the monster and the military shooting at it. You know what I mean? That's what it could have been. And it isn't. And, I think that's all these characters and this romance has to do.
Yeah, and like we've said many times, it's quite easy for movies to not even do the basic on that level. Where
Yeah.
this movie does it, serves you a good enough story where you can kind of follow these characters, and yeah, essentially does the job in on the narrative side of things for the movie.
If that was the focus of the movie, then it wouldn't work. It wouldn't be good enough. But because it's just kind of an underpinning, it's kind of a skeleton, that's why I'm fine with it. And that's like it does at that point, it doesn't need to be more. This kind of leads into another aspect of this, and this is not a happy ending. Like kaiju movies generally aren't, but they usually end with somehow the monster dies in the end. And then there's a lot of devastation and a whole lot of death. But like in the end, the monster is either the monster dies or the monster goes away in the end. And that's not what happens here, right? Here we have one character just outright die, right? Malena just dies. Lily is probably escapes, although it's a coin flip, right? Because not all the helicopters who take off actually make it out. And then Rob and Beth and Hud, like Hud just gets eaten, and then Rob and Beth kind of die under a bridge, right? Like I said. So this is not a happy ending. There are very few movies that actually shy away from not having a happy ending, right? Like they could have escaped, like they could have gotten to a boat and then escaped the island, and then kind of Manhattan gets bombed in the background and the monster dies. And then a whole lot of people have died, but at least Rob and Beth are okay, right? That would have been the standard Hollywood ending, and they don't do it. Instead, they die in a ditch and they kind of record their dying words, which end up in some government file. And the way all this is labeled is kind of grim, like paints a grim picture, right? Like in the very beginning, there's like a note that says this video was taken in the area formerly known as Central Park. So, which kind of suggests that no, they did not in fact win. Like the monster is still around, Manhattan is no longer around, Central Park is no longer around. So there's like an implication that despite all of this, they still didn't win, or at least that there was collateral damage. It was so big that basically they did not in fact go back to how it was before. So this movie actually has a C cinema score, which essentially, like, cinema score is basically like a survey they give to moviegoers after they leave the cinema, and it's basically a vibe check, like how do audiences feel as they walk off the cinema, and people were not feeling it as they walked out of the cinema, and this is why this movie has a C, although it's not a bad, like, I don't think anybody is saying this is a bad movie, right? Like people, like audiences are not lambasting. This has made a whole bunch of money, won a bunch of prizes. You're not giving this a bad rating because it's crap, because it's junk. You're giving it a bad rating because it's a downer ending. I kind of understand why movies tend to not go for the downer ending. Although I think if they did more often, then we would have more better movies, and the stakes would be higher, and we would have a broader range of stories and movies that we can enjoy. And shoehorning movies into kind of the Hollywood ending is kind of something that's kind of a crutch for everybody, where kind of nobody wins. And this movie just didn't do it. Like, it just refuses to give us the happy ending and was punished for it.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. I think it would make a lot more movies a lot better in terms of its conclusion and how it ends, just because and we have it with the comic book genre, when the hero is going to win at the end of the day. It sometimes kind of takes away from the stakes, and it takes away from those moments where you're trying to add danger, you're trying to add a level of threat in the movie. But if you're going to get the happy ending at the end of it, sometimes, like, if like, and there are some movies where you're going to get the happy ending, but the thrill that it puts you through, you do feel it. Like, for example, this year we had Mission Impossible with the dive scene into the submarine. He's going to come out of it, but still in that scene, you kind of feel the tension, you feel the stakes, you feel the danger in it. But quite more often than not, it's just like a bunch of action, and they're going to be fine at the end of it. So if it's not done creatively, then it doesn't really move you. And for me, I personally like a bit of a downer ending sometimes. Like, this kind of reminds me of Rogue One, for example, which is my favorite Star Wars movie, where it's just bleak. There is no happy ending, and it kind of like shows the war that they're up against the Empire in a particular movie, and how all the sacrifices and all the lives lost in this war to sort of get a bit of freedom and get a bit of peace from the Empire. So I was a fan with how it ended. I was a fan with people being picked off one at a time. I think the only one I just didn't like was HUD's death because it didn't make sense. And again, it's like it almost teases the happy ending because they have the helicopter crash and they somehow survive that. And it almost kind of teases the happy ending of like they've all survived and they will like somehow get away. But then it still confuses me how you don't hear the kaiju coming, and it's like 1 minute you go to pick up a camera and then you turn around and then there's this big kaiju, and then like it then kind of feeds into Rob and Beth like, you were right there as well. How the hell did you guys get away from this as well? So that's the only one that irks me a little bit in this movie because it just kind of doesn't make sense. But the rest of it, I think, was really poignant, especially like the callback to, you know, the start of the movie where they're kind of like everyone's trying to record the message for Rob, and then it ends with them recording their final words or their final message. I thought that was really nice.
With HUD, it's maybe a little bit contrived, and sometimes the monster kind of just appears or disappears quite conveniently, and I think that's one of those scenes. But yeah, generally I think the deaths make sense and the setbacks make sense. So I think the movie is better off for it. Like, if they all just sailed off into the sunset, it would not be a more interesting story, right? And that kind of leads me into the next observation, which is that there have been a bunch of American kaiju movies, but none of them have kind of paralleled the heritage of Godzilla, right? So do you know how, like, where the Godzilla movies came from?
Are you referring to the World War II bombings? I don't know if you're like referring to that, or like I think that's more the metaphor of Godzilla.
You're absolutely right. So this came in the 50s, kind of as a way to process the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And this idea that death comes out of nowhere and it's unstoppable and it's overwhelming and all you can do is hope to survive it. There's no fighting it. There's no winning it. There's no outsmarting it. It just happens to you and maybe you live. Like this impulse is what Japanese filmmakers turned into the kaiju genre. And it's obviously evolved since then. And I think a lot of modern kaiju movies, especially American kaiju movies, feel kind of hollow, is that they don't tap into something real. They kind of it's just destruction for its own sake. And in the end, the monster maybe dies, maybe doesn't. I adore Pacific Rim, but that kind of has a similar problem. The modern MonsterVerse movies are about nothing, and that is why, because they are just general purpose destruction and chaos, but they don't tie into anything. I think Cloverfield is different. Cloverfield came out in 2008, 7 years after the September 11 attacks. And that is the only event in American history that comes close to having a similar impact on people as a nuclear bomb attack has. Because it came out of nowhere, it caused widespread destruction and death, like if you were in the area that was impacted, right? And there was only and you survived it by sheer chance. And it kind of did a number on the American psyche for a while after this, right? This is the only kaiju movie that I am aware of, and there may be others, but I couldn't name any, that actually ties very directly into that. So it's set in Manhattan. It's a devastating destruction that comes out of nowhere. Skyscrapers collapse. Clouds of dust kind of race down kind of these streets, right? Like if you've seen the real footage from September 11, that is what happened too. That is just what it looks like when a skyscraper in Manhattan collapses. It's just this giant cloud of dust that just comes at you and just engulfs everything. And the way people behave, the way people are shot, right? Like the initial confusion, the kind of people being kind of shell-shocked, people kind of just standing around, not being able to really understand what's going on, and then they realize what's going on, and then they try to get to safety. All of that draws directly from, September 11 imagery. And at the time, the movie was criticized for doing this because it seemed cheap, it seemed exploitative, it seemed in poor taste. And even today, you get this where, like, I think it was Man of Steel as well, when the Kryptonians fight, skyscrapers collapse, and the imagery that results from a skyscraper collapsing looks a lot like September 11, and even back when did Man of Steel come out, 2013, something like that. That movie was criticized for that as well, like along the same lines. And just that's kind of what it looks like when a skyscraper collapses. There's not much you can do about it. Like you can either make it look like September 11, or you can make it look fake. Those are your two options. Like there's no neutral option there. But this movie kind of uses the kaiju attack as, like, it's not an allegory for what happened, like similar, like Godzilla, like, is linked to radioactivity, but it's not directly a an allegory for a nuclear bomb, right? But it kind of replicates the sensation of what it's apparently like to live through an event like this. And Cloverfield does the same thing, where this is what it feels like when there's an event like this and you are stuck in the city and you are confused, and whether you live or die is pure chance depending on where you are at the moment. If you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you're just gone. And there's no rhyme or reason to it. There's no justice to it. There's no system to it. It just happens. And I think that is why this movie is more authentic and more interesting, I think, than any other kaiju movie, like American kaiju movie that's been made. It's because it's so deliberately taps into that imagery and that sensation. And also it came out only 7 years afterwards. Like if somebody does it now, it's like 24 years later. It's a little bit abstract. It's ancient history at this point. But like this was fairly raw at the time. Like if there were New Yorker like background actors, they probably lived through it, right? Like they probably were there, maybe, like at least some of them. You know what I mean? Like it's more direct. Like the link is more direct than it is for other movies like this.
I think as well, in terms of that feeling of not replicating it, but almost like reliving that experience, is the element of the party at the start of the movie where everything seems so normal and you're kind of just going about your day to day. And, it's quite different to other kaiju movies where you're kind of getting that build up to seeing the monster, whether it's people in the, whether it's like people in like the research facilities, like studying like graphs and stuff like that. And you kind of feel like something's coming eventually. In this movie, and it's actually funny because I remember saying this at the top of this where I was a little confused as to what this movie was. I paused it about 30 seconds before the attack happened to like Google, like, am I watching the right movie? Like, I thought this was meant to be about this disaster, and I quickly just like Googled just like some images just to make sure. I was like, this is the movie I am thinking it is, right? And then literally as the characters experience it, like, and I think it kind of doing that probably took away from the experience of that initial impact. But you can imagine just being in this normal setup, this normal life that you live in, looking forward to whatever, just expecting the next day to come, expecting this move to happen for Rob, etc. Just normal life, and then out of nowhere, this attack happens, and your whole life is impacted by it. And again, I can imagine that's how people would have felt on 9/11, where it was just another day until it wasn't. And I think this movie kind of brings to life that essence of how, again, unexpected or random something like that can be, and that you can't just take things for granted. It's like you just never know when something might happen.
I wish I had noted down the line. I was just looking in the quotes to see, like, IMDb has a quote section, and I was trying to find it. And like the last line before the first big explosion, Hud says something to Rob about doing the right thing, or you'll do the right thing, like when it counts, or something like that. And then 5 seconds later, the oil tanker explodes, and from there on out, it's just crisis. And the second half of the movie is about him doing the right thing, not running away from the problem and so on. So yeah, I think you're right that there's a kind of a little bit of a not realism exactly, but believability in terms of how this unfolds and how characters react because of that. Having seen this once and after this conversation, is this one that goes on the shelf that should be recommended or that you would want to see again? Or is this fine for what it is, but once is enough?
No, I think this is a very good movie. One that definitely goes on the shelf and is one to be recommended as well. I think this movie does so many things right in terms of just its portrayal of the event, the portrayal of the characters in the event, how everything unfolds, how people react to certain situations, the immersion into the world and into the attack. You kind of feel like you're there with the characters as well. Maybe you could do, and this is just like a personal thing, maybe you could do a little bit better on the more like the horror or like the attack element of the movie, for me personally. But I think everything else around it is very solid, very well done, very well made, and yeah, definitely one that I would recommend.
This is not a perfect movie. There are lots of things it could do better. Like you can pick out any detail and you can think of a way to make it better. But I think it's just really solid. It sets out what it needs to do. It accomplishes what it wants to do. And all the pieces are at least good enough. And I think there's enough interesting stuff in here to be a good watch. For that reason, like it remains one of my favorites that I keep coming back to.
All right, guys. I guess with that, we reached the end of today's episode. As always, if you reach this part of the podcast, we thank you for working with us. We appreciate your support every single time. And if you liked what you heard today and you enjoyed our discussion, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a bunch of nonsense, you should probably tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
Bye-bye.